Bills Mafia? This changes everything. Joey Bosa is done. Buffalo's secret weapon is hiding in Tampa Bay. Bills Mafia? Buckle up. Because today we are dropping two massive storylines that could completely reshape the Buffalo Bills' path to Super Bowl glory, and both of them are happening right now as we speak. One era is officially over. One blockbuster trade opportunity is sitting right in front of the Bills' front office like a gift-wrapped Christmas present. So pour yourself a cold one, settle in, and let's talk about what is going down in the NFL world that directly impacts your Buffalo Bills and their Super Bowl chase in 2026. Let's start with the news that hit the internet like a freight train this week. Joey Bosa, the man who was supposed to be a key piece of the Bills' defensive rebuild, the veteran pass rusher who came to Buffalo last season with high hopes and a $12.6 million deal, appears to have suited up in a Bills jersey for the very last time. And it is not just idle speculation or anonymous Twitter hot takes driving this story. This is coming straight from the most plugged-in insider in all of professional football. Adam Schefter, the man himself, dropped the bombshell on his podcast this week that it is more likely than not that Joey Bosa has played his last NFL down. Let that sink in for a second. One of the most decorated edge rushers of his generation, a 5-time Pro Bowler, a guy who was the 3rd overall pick in the 2016 NFL Draft and went on to terrorize quarterbacks for a decade, maybe walking away from the game at the age of 30. Well, technically turning 31 in July, but still. In NFL terms, that is practically the prime of a defensive end's career. We have seen guys play at an elite level well into their mid-30s. We have seen Aaron Donald. We have seen Calais Campbell. We have seen guys grind and produce long past the age when most people assumed they would hang it up. So why is Joey Bosa apparently ready to call it a career? Here is where it gets really interesting and honestly, a little sad if you are a Joey Bosa fan or even just a Buffalo Bills fan who wanted to see what he could have been in a healthy full season wearing that Bills uniform. Schefter laid it all out on his podcast, and the picture he painted was not one of a player who was forced out by Father Time or a devastating injury. It was the picture of a man who has made over $156 million in his NFL career, who woke up one day and realized he simply does not want to go to training camp anymore. He does not want to put his body through another grind. And honestly, can you blame him? According to reports, Nick Bosa himself has been talking about how his brother is more focused on working on his golf game these days than he is on thinking about football. In late May and early June, when every other player in the NFL is grinding through OTAs and minicamp preparations, Joey Bosa is apparently out on the golf course, living his best life. And when an NFL veteran who has earned well over $150 million has his mind more on his short game than on film study, that tells you a lot about where his head is at. Schefter put it bluntly on his podcast, saying that Bosa appears perfectly content to sit on the sideline with all the money he has made, not have to go to training camp, not have to put himself in a situation he does not want to be in, and be highly selective if he ever does choose an opportunity to play again. And the key word there is if. This is not a guy who is holding out for the right contract offer. This is not a player who is waiting for the perfect situation before he commits. Schefter made it crystal clear that if Joey Bosa wanted to play football right now, it probably would have happened already. And if the San Francisco 49ers, who had a genuine need at edge rusher and the dream storyline of reuniting both Bosa brothers on the same defense, wanted to make it work, it probably would have happened already too.
49ing zone.
The 49ers angle is worth dwelling on for just a moment, because this was the reunion story that had the entire football world buzzing earlier this offseason. You had Nick Bosa anchoring the San Francisco defensive line. You had Joey Bosa sitting out there on the free agent market. You had one of the greatest storylines in recent NFL history just waiting to happen. Brothers playing together, side by side, creating an absolute nightmare for opposing offensive linemen. Even 49ers general manager John Lynch acknowledged the appeal of the situation, saying he knew Mama Bosa would love it, but admitted the money was simply a roadblock that the team could not get over.
The big.
And head coach Kyle Shanahan, when pressed on the subject, basically gave the football equivalent of a shrug. So the Bosa brothers reunion is dead, and with it, any realistic chance that Joey Bosa plays professional football in 2026. Now let us talk about what this all means for the Buffalo Bills specifically. Because the Joey Bosa era in Buffalo was a complicated, uneven, ultimately disappointing story that ended without the dramatic playoff chapter anyone was hoping for. When the Bills brought Bosa in last season, the expectation was that a healthy, motivated veteran pass rusher would transform their defensive line and give Josh Allen and company the elite defensive partner they needed to make a serious Super Bowl run. And for a while, early in the season, it actually looked like it might work out. Bosa was impactful. He generated 47 total pressures as a pass rusher across the season, including 5 sacks, 30 hurries, and 12 hits. He forced 5 fumbles. There were moments where you could see flashes of the old Joey Bosa, the dominant disruptive force who made opposing offenses change their entire game plans. But then the second half of the season arrived, and it was like watching a completely different player. Bosa recorded just 1 sack after the first half of the regular season and was completely blanked during Buffalo's postseason run. 0 sacks in the playoffs. 0 impact in the moments that matter most. The wild card game against Jacksonville. The divisional round against Denver. Joey Bosa was basically a ghost, and the Bills paid $12.6 million for that ghost. The pass rush dried up at the exact moment the Bills needed it most, and now the man is reportedly on the golf course somewhere, apparently content to let that be the final chapter of his NFL story. And here is the brutal truth that Bills fans have to face as we look toward 2026. The edge rush situation in Buffalo is not exactly inspiring confidence right now. You have Bradley Chubb, who has been injury-prone and is on the wrong side of 30. You have Greg Rousseau, who is talented but has never cracked 10 sacks in a single season. You have TJ Parker, who is a rookie with all the promise in the world but none of the proven production. You have Michael Holt coming off a torn Achilles. These are not exactly the building blocks of a dominant pass rush that strikes fear into the hearts of AFC quarterbacks. The Bills could potentially look at available free agents, with names like Jadeveon Clowney and Hassan Ridgeway floating around, but frankly, neither of those guys even ranked as high as Joey Bosa did on ESPN's list of best available free agents, which tells you everything you need to know about where the pass rush market stands right now. So the edge situation is uncertain at best and concerning at worst. But here is where the story gets really juicy. Because while the Bills are dealing with the Joey Bosa retirement saga, a potentially franchise-altering trade opportunity has emerged that could make Bills Mafia forget all about pass rushers and instead start dreaming about having one of the most dominant interior defensive linemen in the entire NFL wearing a red, white, and blue jersey this season. Ladies and gentlemen, let us talk about Vita Vea. If you are not familiar with Vita Vea, allow me to paint you a picture. This man is 6'4" and 347 pounds of pure, uncut defensive dominance. He is the kind of nose tackle that makes offensive coordinators lose sleep at night. He is the human wrecking ball that Tampa Bay has built their entire defensive identity around for the better part of a decade. Since Vita Vea became a full-time starter for the Buccaneers in 2019, Tampa Bay has had the #1 rush defense in the entire National Football League. The pewter plank. Let that statistic roll around in your brain for a moment. Not a top 5 rush defense, not a top 3 rush defense. The absolute best run-stopping unit in the league over a sustained multi-year period. And Vita Vea is the single biggest reason why. The man has earned 2 Pro Bowl selections and accumulated 35 career sacks, which is a remarkable total for a nose tackle, a position that does not typically generate quarterback pressure the way edge rushers do. He is the kind of player who commands double teams on virtually every single snap, which opens up lanes for his teammates, creates havoc behind the line of scrimmage, and generally makes the entire defense around him better. He is Aaron Donald adjacent in terms of his impact on a defense, even if his statistical lines do not always pop off the page the way a traditional pass rusher's would. Now here is where the Bills enter the picture in a very significant way. Vita Vea showed up to mandatory minicamp for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers recently, but he was not participating with his teammates. He was walking around the practice fields in shorts, a jersey, and a ball cap, essentially doing everything except actually playing football. And head coach Todd Bowles, when pressed on the situation, confirmed what everyone already suspected. It was not an injury keeping Vea off the field. It was a contract dispute.
Future-roo.
Vea is currently set to make $17 million in 2026, the final year of a 4-year contract extension he signed back in 2022. His average annual salary of $17.75 million ranks him 19th among interior defenders in the league. 19th. A player who has been arguably the best run-stopping nose tackle in the NFL for the better part of a decade is getting paid like the 19th best player at his position. Meanwhile, other defensive tackles around the league are cashing checks for $23, $24, even $25 million a year. Jeffrey Simmons of the Tennessee Titans just signed a massive extension worth over $35 million per year, and that contract has absolutely strengthened Vea's stance in demanding more money from Tampa Bay. When you look at the market and see that other guys at your position are making double what you are making, you have every right in the world to walk into your general manager's office and say it is time to have a conversation. And to make the situation even more significant for potential trade suitors, none of Vea's 2026 salary is currently guaranteed. $0 guaranteed on a $17 million contract for one of the most dominant defensive players in the game. That is the kind of leverage imbalance that can push a situation toward a resolution very quickly. Whether that resolution is a new contract, a market adjustment on his current deal, or something else entirely. Something like a trade. Tampa Bay Buccaneers analyst Josh Kreisler has already named the Buffalo Bills as a top potential trade suitor for Vita Vea, and the reasoning is absolutely airtight. The Buffalo Bills ranked 28th in rushing defense last season, allowing 136 yards per game on the ground. They finished with a 12-5 record and made a serious playoff run, but they could not win their division, and their porous run defense was a major factor. The Bills have been talking about fixing their run defense for years. They have made moves in the draft and free agency to address it. They brought in new faces along the defensive line. But the hard truth is that you do not just magically develop elite run-stopping ability overnight. It takes an anchor. It takes a player who commands respect and demands double teams and sets the tone for every single snap. That player is Vita Vea. Now imagine for a moment what the Bills' defense looks like with Vea in the middle. You slide Ed Oliver next to him, give Deon Walker room to develop on the outside, bring in Greg Rousseau and Bradley Chubb off the edge, and suddenly you have a defensive front that would be the most feared unit in the AFC. A defensive line that could shut down the run game so completely that opposing offenses become one-dimensional, making life infinitely easier for Turn Johnson, the linebackers, and the secondary. Josh Allen would not have to try to outscore everyone anymore. He would have a defense behind him capable of winning games all by itself. The financial situation with Vea actually makes a trade more realistic than you might think. The Buccaneers are dealing with significant salary cap constraints. Only 4 teams in the entire league currently have less cap room than Tampa Bay. And that is before accounting for what they might have to pay Baker Mayfield in a contract extension. Tampa Bay is not in a position to simply hand Vea a massive market-resetting deal. They have competing financial priorities all over their roster. And with Vea having no guaranteed money remaining on his current contract, Tampa Bay has very limited leverage in these negotiations. They cannot threaten to cut him and walk away with nothing because they have virtually no dead money concerns. But they also cannot afford to make him one of the highest-paid defensive tackles in the league while also trying to extend their franchise quarterback. This is exactly the kind of organizational squeeze play that opens the door for a trade. And for the Bills, the acquisition cost to get Vea would likely not be astronomical. We are talking about a player in the final year of his deal with no guaranteed money in a contract dispute with his current team. Tampa Bay's leverage in trade negotiations is minimal. If the Bills walked in with a fourth-round pick, maybe a third-round pick, they could potentially land one of the most impactful defensive players in the entire league. A rental? Sure. But what a rental. If Vita Vea is the piece that gets the Buffalo Bills to a Super Bowl, you hand over that draft pick without blinking, and you do not look back. ESPN analyst Booger McFarland, who is based in Tampa and has a close read on the Buccaneers organization, said publicly that he is not concerned about the situation and believes it will get resolved before any real bad blood develops between Vea and the team. And that is probably the most realistic outcome. The Buccaneers will likely find a way to give Vea a market adjustment or a short-term extension that keeps him in Tampa. They do not want to lose the cornerstone of their entire defensive identity.